Nigeria, a nation of immense wealth, profound resilience, and vibrant culture, has also wrestled with dark, complex security challenges. Over the last 2 decades, a shadow economy has violently emerged, the kidnapping for ransom industry. This epidemic did not happen in a vacuum. It was birthed from a perfect storm of systemic issues. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, rising youth unemployment, extreme wealth inequality, political thuggery, and a severely under-equipped police force created a fertile breeding ground for organized crime. Young men, often from impoverished backgrounds, watched politicians amass immense wealth and realized that the quickest way to the top was through the barrel of a gun. What started as political militancy in the Niger Delta soon devolved into pure criminality across the nation. Today, we are looking at the 10 most dangerous and notorious kidnappers in Nigerian history, examining their roots, their ruthless operations, their political connections, and their ultimate downfalls. Starting our list is the man dubbed the billionaire kidnapper, Chukwudumeme Onwamadike, infamously known as Evans. Born in 1981 into a Christian family in Nnewi, Anambra State, Evans did not come from absolute destitution, but his family experienced severe financial instability after his parents separated. He dropped out of secondary school in junior secondary class 2. Unwilling to accept a life of poverty, he moved to Lagos and was allegedly mentored into the criminal underworld by older armed robbers. Evans announced himself to the criminal world not with noise, but with chilling sophistication. Operating heavily in Lagos and Edo states, he targeted ultra-wealthy businessmen and expatriates. Unlike typical kidnappers, Evans ran a highly compartmentalized squad where members did not know each other. He kept victims for months in rented, upscale mansions until ransoms, paid strictly in United States dollars, were delivered. It is estimated that he amassed tens of millions of dollars, buying luxury properties in Nigeria and Ghana. His operations paralyzed the business community in Lagos, with many wealthy elites fleeing the state. Evans' downfall came in 2017, when one of his victims escaped from a detention facility in Igando, Lagos. This led the Inspector General of Police's Intelligence Response Team, IRT, led by Abba Kyari, to track his specialized encrypted phones. Evans was captured in his Magodo mansion. After a lengthy, highly publicized trial, he was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2022. Moving to the northern region, we encounter Hamisu Bala, popularly known as Wadume. Raised in an impoverished Muslim household in Taraba State, Wadume had little formal education and started his adult life as a humble fish seller. However, the economic desperation of the region, coupled with the influx of illegal firearms, gave him an opening into the criminal underworld. Wadume evolved into a highly influential kidnapper and gun runner. What made him exceptionally dangerous was his deep integration into the local political and security architecture. He was not just a thug, he was a political enforcer who allegedly funded campaigns and heavily bribed security officials. Wadume operated primarily in Taraba State, terrorizing the region and making hundreds of millions of naira by kidnapping local politicians and businessmen. His operations exposed a terrifying level of state complicity. When the police IRT finally captured him in August 2019, tragedy struck. As police drove him to Abuja, soldiers attached to the 93 Battalion in Takum, allegedly on the payroll of Wadume, intercepted the police bus, opened fire, and killed 3 elite police officers and 2 civilians to free him. The nation was outraged. Wadume was rearrested days later in Kano. Despite the gravity of his crimes and the treasonous murder of police officers, he was sentenced in 2022 to a shockingly light 7 years in prison, highlighting the deep political backing he enjoyed. In the Middle Belt, few names evoke as much terror as Tawase Akwaza, universally known as Ghana. Born in Benue State into a rural family with traditional spiritual beliefs mixed with Christianity, Ghana had minimal formal education. He grew up during periods of intense communal and ethnic clashes in Benue and Taraba. Initially framing himself as a local vigilante protecting his thief community from rival attacks, Ghana quickly realized that the arms he had amassed could be used for extreme profit. He built a massive militia and essentially became a warlord, engaging in mass kidnappings, assassinations, and cattle rustling. He operated with absolute impunity, utilizing the thick forests of Benue as his fortress. Ghana was heavily feared because he claimed to possess dark mystical powers that made him invisible to bullets. He exacted heavy taxes on local farmers and reportedly made billions of naira over his career. His operations turned parts of Benue into a war zone, heavily destabilizing the region's agricultural output. Ghana allegedly had backing from several high-ranking local politicians who used his militia to intimidate opponents. In 2020, after a bounty of 50 million naira was placed on his head, Ghana agreed to an amnesty deal brokered by local elders. However, on his way to the government house to surrender, his convoy was intercepted by the Nigerian military. Ghana was pulled from the vehicle and killed by the soldiers, a move that sparked massive controversy and debate over extrajudicial killings. Our fourth subject earned a moniker straight out of a horror movie, Henry Chibueze, known as Vampire. Operating primarily in Imo State and the wider Southeast, Vampire's background is steeped in extreme violence. Born into a struggling Christian family, he dropped out of school early and embraced the violent street gangs of the East. Vampire was mentored by ruthless armed robbers before transitioning to kidnapping because the financial yields were significantly higher. He announced himself through sheer brutality. If a ransom was delayed, he would wipe out the victim's entire family. He operated a well-armed, highly mobile squad that kidnapped politicians, businessmen, and even children. Vampire was making tens of millions of naira per operation. The sheer brutality of his operations caused a mass exodus of commerce from Owerri and Abia. In 2015, the Department of State Services, DSS, finally captured him. However, in January 2017, in an unprecedented display of audacity, his heavily armed squad stormed the Owerri High Court while he was standing trial. They opened fire on the prison warders, killed several people, and successfully rescued him. The escape humiliated the Nigerian security apparatus. An intense, nationwide manhunt was launched. Just 2 months later, in March 2017, police special forces tracked him to a forest in Rivers State. He refused to surrender, engaging the police in a heavy firefight. Vampire was shot dead, ending one of the bloodiest reigns in modern Nigerian history. In 2010, the commercial city of Abia in Abia State was brought to its knees by one man, Obioma, notoriously known as Osisikankwu. Raised in the rural Ukwa West local government area, Osisikankwu came from a poor traditional background with very little education. The late 2000s in the Niger Delta were characterized by massive militant uprisings over oil wealth. Osisikankwu initially joined the Niger Delta militants, but soon splintered off, realizing that kidnapping in the commercial hub of Abia would be highly lucrative. He built an army of heavily armed youths. He announced himself by kidnapping foreign expatriates, prominent traders, and even school children. Osisikankwu essentially seized control of Abia. Banks closed, markets were abandoned, and citizens fled the city entirely, devastating the economy of Abia State. He operated from the impenetrable evil forest in Ugwati, raking in hundreds of millions in ransom. He was heavily suspected of being a political thug used during the 2007 elections, who was later abandoned by his political godfathers, leading him to turn his guns on the state. The situation became so dire that the federal government deployed the Nigerian army in a special operation codenamed Operation Jubilee. In December 2010, soldiers stormed his forest enclave. Following a massive gun battle, Osisikankwu was shot and killed, and his corpse was paraded through the streets to reassure the terrified public that the monster was dead. Delta State produced its own nightmare in the form of Kelvin Ibru. Coming from Kokori, a small, economically marginalized oil-producing community, Kelvin grew up in a Christian household, but was surrounded by the stark contrast between the multi-billion-dollar oil facilities and the abject poverty of his people. With little formal education, he was drawn into the militant struggles of the region. However, Kelvin soon morphed his activism into a highly organized, lethal kidnapping syndicate. He became the most wanted man in the South-South, responsible for the abduction of high-profile lawyers, judges, and expatriates. He operated with a terrifying squad and had deep community backing. The youths of Kokori saw him as a Robin Hood figure because he distributed some of his ransom money to the impoverished townspeople. This grassroots support made it nearly impossible for local police to catch him. His operations severely crippled foreign investment in Delta State. In September 2013, Kelvin brazenly issued a 60-day ultimatum to the federal government, threatening to blow up oil facilities if his community was not developed. This hubris was his undoing. Just days after his public announcement, a joint task force of the DSS and the Nigerian army tracked him to a hotel in Port Harcourt, Rivers State. He was captured alive, heavily interrogated, and subsequently remanded in maximum security prison to face terrorism and kidnapping charges. Shifting our focus to the devastating banditry in the northwest, we look at Awal Daudawa. Born into an impoverished nomadic Fulani Muslim family in Zamfara State, Daudawa had no formal Western education, only basic Islamic schooling. He grew up in an environment plagued by climate change, cattle rustling, and fierce ethnic clashes between farmers and herders. Originally a cattle herder, he was drawn into armed banditry as a means of survival and retaliation. Daudawa soon realized that kidnapping humans paid far better than stealing cows. He rose to international infamy in December 2020 when he masterminded the abduction of over 300 schoolboys from the government science secondary school in Kankara, Katsina State. Operating from the deadly Rugu forest with a massive squad of heavily armed men, he negotiated ransoms that funded the purchase of military-grade weapons. His operations and those of his peers completely destroyed the educational infrastructure in the Northwest, keeping millions of children out of school. In early 2021, under massive military pressure, Daudawa accepted a peace deal and handed over his weapons. However, the lure of the criminal underworld was too strong. Months later, he returned to the forest to resume kidnapping. In April 2021, his reign was abruptly ended, not by the government, but by a rival bandit group who shot him dead during a fierce territorial clash in the Zamfara forests. Operating in the same dark ecosystem is Dogo Gide, another master kidnapper and bandit warlord. Coming from a similar impoverished nomadic Muslim background in Niger State, Gide grew up uneducated and disenfranchised. He began his criminal career under the mentorship of older cattle rustlers before branching out to form his own heavily armed militia. Gide announced himself by orchestrating some of the most daring mass abductions in recent history, specifically targeting schools and entire communities across Niger, Zamfara, and Kaduna states. He operates more like a terrorist than a traditional kidnapper, forging uneasy alliances with extremist groups like ISWAP to acquire sophisticated weaponry. Gide's syndicate has extorted hundreds of millions in ransom, often demanding that communities buy them motorcycles or food in exchange for peace. His operations have led to the total desertion of hundreds of farming villages, severely threatening Nigeria's food security. Unlike many on this list, Gide has managed to evade capture. He uses the vast ungoverned forest reserves spanning several states as a shield, leveraging his deep knowledge of the terrain. Despite numerous military airstrikes and ground offensives aimed at his camps, Dogo Gide remains at large as of recent reports, a lingering phantom haunting the northwest. Concluding our list is perhaps the most visible and feared bandit kidnapper operating today, Bello Turji. Born in 1994 in Shinkafi, Zamfara State, into a Muslim family of herdsmen, Turji experienced the bitter, violent ethnic conflicts of the region firsthand. Claiming that his family's cattle were stolen and his people marginalized by the state and local vigilantes, Turji took up arms. However, his revenge quickly evolved into a multi-million naira kidnapping empire. Turji leads a massive squad of fighters operating with terrifying impunity. He announced his power by imposing heavy taxes on local governments, kidnapping traditional rulers, and orchestrating the burning of passenger buses. Turji is known for giving media interviews, attempting to justify his crimes politically, yet he continues to slaughter and abduct innocent travelers and farmers. His operations have crippled the economy of Sokoto and Zamfara states. He has allegedly received backing from corrupt local informants who tip him off to military movements. Despite massive military offensives and bounties placed on his head, Turji has proven incredibly elusive. He continues to wage a guerrilla war from the forests. As of the time of this script, Bello Turji remains uncaptured, serving as a dark reminder of the ongoing, desperate battle the Nigerian state faces against the monster of kidnapping.